I am the reason my husband ran into the hospital screaming for them to stop the surgery. My name is Rachel Monroe, and for 3 peaceful years, I truly believed I had rebuilt my life, until everything I trusted, my marriage, my safety, even my child's future, was shattered in less than an hour. It started on a cool October morning. I was standing in my kitchen, flipping pancakes, sunlight spilling through the windows, my little boy Noah dancing barefoot on the tiles in his pajamas. His laughter echoed through the house. My husband Jacob, dressed in his white coat, leaned in and kissed me on the forehead. He was supposed to be the man who saved lives. Instead, he had been waiting for years to destroy mine. Noah had just turned 6. He called Jacob Daddy, with a warmth that melted my heart every time. At first, he hesitated. His real father, Andrew, and I had separated when Noah was only 2, and out of respect, I never pushed him. But kids have a way of knowing who shows up for them, and Jacob always showed up. He was the one who taught Noah how to ride a bike, patched up scraped knees, and stayed up during every fever. Jacob was a pediatric surgeon, calm, brilliant, and deeply committed to his work. But what truly made me fall for him was the way he treated Noah, as if Noah were his own. That morning he poured coffee into my favorite mug and whispered, "Today's light, 1 surgery in the afternoon." Home by dinner, I smiled, watching him lift Noah up into the air, both of them laughing. It felt like one of those rare moments where everything aligned. After the chaos of my divorce, I thought maybe, just maybe, I had found peace. Jacob made breakfast while humming quietly, and I remember thinking, this is what healing looks like. Later that evening, we curled up on the couch, and he brought up Noah's sore throat again. "It's been lingering too long," he said gently. "I'd like to take a closer look tomorrow, just to be safe." I nodded. He was the expert. I trusted him without question. That night, as I tucked Noah into bed, he looked up at me with sleepy eyes. "Mom, can Daddy be the one to fix my throat?" I kissed his forehead. "Of course, sweetheart. Daddy's the best doctor in the whole world." And I meant it. I didn't know then that Jacob had been preparing for this surgery since before we met. I didn't know he had changed his name. I didn't know that 10 years ago, I had unknowingly rewritten the fate of another child, his child. I used to think second chances were miracles. That was before I realized some people wear masks so well, they forget who they used to be. After my divorce from Andrew, I never imagined I could rebuild a life that felt stable. But when I met Jacob, calm, thoughtful, warm-hearted Jacob, it felt like the universe had handed me a do-over. He was the man who held open doors, remembered the name of my son's stuffed dinosaur, and never raised his voice. Noah, my 5-year-old boy, had been hesitant at first. When I explained to him gently that Jacob and I were getting married, he only asked one thing: "Will he be nice when I'm sick?" It broke my heart in a way only a mother would understand. Jacob had passed that test 100 times over. He carried Noah through a flu that wiped both of us out for days. He stayed up beside him when fevers hit, whispering bedtime stories and checking his temperature with more care than I'd ever seen from anyone, blood relative or not. It was 6 months after we married that Noah started calling him Dad. I remember the moment exactly. We were in the backyard. Jacob was helping Noah build a birdhouse. Sawdust in the air, sunlight cutting through the maple trees. "Dad, can I paint it blue?" My heart paused in my chest. Jacob looked over at me first, not at Noah, as if asking for permission. I gave him the smallest nod I could manage without tears falling. "Blue's a perfect choice, buddy," Jacob had replied, voice steady. From that moment on, it felt like the final chapter of my grief had turned into something new. A story about healing, about moving forward, if only that were the truth. It started small. A sore throat. Noah had always been sensitive to seasonal allergies, so I didn't panic. But this time it lingered. When the usual remedies stopped working, I asked Jacob to take a look. As a licensed surgeon, he had treated dozens of pediatric cases. He'd always been cautious and conservative when it came to medicine. But this time, After just one look at Noah's throat, his face changed. "One may need to consider removing his tonsils," he said, eyes narrowing. "They're severely inflamed. If this keeps recurring, it could lead to more serious issues." That night, while Noah slept, we sat at the kitchen table with surgical pamphlets, diagrams, and statistics spread across the wood surface. Jacob explained everything in terms I could understand: risks, recovery, alternatives. Then he said the words that made it all feel safe. "I'll do the surgery myself. I've done this more times than I can count. I would never let anything happen to him." It was only natural that I called Andrew, my ex. Noah still saw him regularly. They had a cordial father-son bond. I believed in transparency, even if the past between Andrew and me was far from easy. "Jacob will perform the surgery himself," I told Andrew over the phone. "He says it's a simple outpatient procedure." There was a long pause. "All right," Andrew finally said. "If it's best for Noah, I won't interfere." A week before the surgery, something in Jacob changed. He became quieter, more focused. He spent long hours in his study, buried in surgical texts, notes, and medical journals. One night, I peeked in to bring him tea. "Are you nervous?" I asked gently. He didn't look up. "This is more than just a procedure," he said. "This is important for Noah?" I asked. He nodded. But the look in his eyes was not the same as the man who helped Noah build birdhouses. It was darker, heavier, like he was carrying a weight I couldn't see. The morning of the surgery was clear and cold. Noah clung to his stuffed dinosaur, Rexy, wrapped in a hospital blanket, his eyes sleepy but trusting. Jacob kissed my forehead before wheeling Noah toward the operating room. "I'll take care of our boy," he said softly. "He's in the best hands." I wanted to believe that. I needed to. But the moment the doors closed behind them, something twisted in my stomach. I told myself it was normal, pre-surgery nerves. But it wasn't nerves, it was instinct. Something subtle, buried deep in my bones. The kind that whispers when everything looks fine but isn't. I waited in the family room, white-knuckled and pacing. The minutes crawled by. 30, then 40, then an hour. I tried to read the pamphlet on post-operative care, but the words blurred into meaningless lines. Then shouting. Not just inside my head, real shouting. A man's voice echoed from the corridor. "Urgent." I jumped to my feet. Nurses rushed past me. A loud beep followed, then alarms. I ran toward the doors, but an orderly held me back. "Ma'am, please stay in the waiting area." "That's my son in there!" I shouted. Then I saw him, Andrew, bursting through the double doors, chest heaving, face pale. "They switched the instruments," he cried. "Something's wrong." I couldn't process the words. "Andrew, what are you talking about?" But he didn't answer me. He was already being dragged away by security, still yelling, wild-eyed. And behind him, down the corridor, a nurse appeared, one I hadn't seen before, pushing Noah's bed back into the hallway. "He didn't operate," she said quickly. We stopped it. My legs gave out. Later, when the chaos settled, when Noah was resting in recovery, untouched, unharmed, I finally cornered Jacob outside the nurse's station. "What happened in there?" I asked. My voice was low, trembling. He didn't meet my eyes. There was a delay. Something about sterilization protocols. The surgical team didn't feel comfortable proceeding. "That's not what I heard," I said. Why was Andrew here? Why was he screaming about instruments? Jacob's jaw clenched. He didn't answer. That night, I couldn't sleep. When Jacob finally came to bed, I asked the question I'd been too scared to ask. "Would you ever hurt Noah?" He turned to me slowly. "What kind of question is that?" "Just answer." "No," he said firmly. "I love him. He's my son too." But it was the way he said it, too fast, too calculated, that made my skin crawl. I stared at the ceiling until sunrise, clutching Noah close in my arms, while Jacob lay motionless beside me, pretending to sleep. The next morning, I told Jacob I was taking Noah out for fresh air. We needed space. Time to process. He didn't argue. He barely looked up from his coffee. That silence said more than any words. We drove to a park an hour outside the city, one with tall pine trees and no cell reception. Noah ran ahead, bundled in his red coat, giggling as he stomped through patches of snow. I sat on the bench, watching him, my hands shaking. I called Andrew. He picked up immediately. "Emily." He breathed. "Is he okay?" "He's fine," I said. "You stopped it. Just in time. But now, I need to know everything. No more riddles, no more games." "What did you find?" Andrew exhaled. "I shouldn't be the one telling you this. Tell me anyway." Silence. Then, "Jacob isn't listed as the operating physician on Noah's record. I checked the logs. His name was wiped. Replaced by someone else. Someone unlicensed. That's why I came." My heart stopped. "What do you mean unlicensed?" "I mean someone who shouldn't have been anywhere near a child's brain. The instruments weren't prepped for a tumor resection. They were configured for an experimental implantation procedure. One I recognized from a case Jacob and I reviewed years ago. It was never approved, not even for animals." My skin turned to ice. What would he gain? Andrew hesitated. "He's been desperate for funding, Emily. Since you got pregnant, he's buried your family in debt. The only way he keeps his research alive is if he produces results. If he proves his theory works." "You think he was going to experiment on Noah?" Andrew didn't answer. He didn't have to. I couldn't breathe. I sat in that cold, dead park, watching my little boy laugh and toss snow in the air, while my brain crumbled like frost under boots. Everything Jacob had ever said about family, about love, about trust, all of it, felt like a script rehearsed to cover something unthinkable. That night I packed bags. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't leave a note. I drove Noah 3 states away to my sister's cabin. She owed me nothing, which made her the safest person I could think of. And then I called a lawyer. And then I called the Board of Medical Ethics. And then, when I had just enough courage left, I sat down across from my son, his cheeks pink from the firelight, and said softly, "From now on, I'm going to protect you, no matter what." He looked up at me with eyes full of trust. "Even from Daddy." I froze. Then nodded. "They say courtrooms are where truth comes to light." Whoever said that never stood on the opposite side of a man who used to share your bed, your future, your last name, now hiding behind lawyers, medical records he rewrote, and a smile crafted for reporters. The custody hearing was brutal. Jacob's attorney painted me as paranoid, emotionally unstable, and prone to delusions since childbirth. He even had the audacity to reference my temporary postpartum depression, something I had sought help for honestly and early, now weaponized against me. But I had Andrew, and Andrew had the files. Internal emails between Jacob and a shadowy biotech firm in Switzerland. Records showing falsified credentials used to gain operating room access under a research alias. The ethics board had opened a full investigation by then. His license was suspended pending a hearing. But Jacob didn't care. He was already 5 steps ahead, spinning the media to look like a betrayed genius whose miraculous pediatric procedure had been sabotaged by an over-emotional ex-wife. Noah stayed with me. The judge granted temporary sole custody until the medical board reached a verdict. Jacob was allowed monitored visitation, under supervision in a neutral facility. That first visit was hollow. He sat across from Noah like a stranger. And my son, my brave, bright boy, didn't run into his arms. He clung to mine, as if he finally understood the distance between DNA and devotion. The weeks that followed were filled with lawyers, reporters, and whispered conversations with investigators. But at night, when Noah was asleep and the world went quiet, I would lie awake replaying every moment of my marriage. The compliments that felt too perfect. The strange absences on weekends. The way he looked at Noah sometimes. Not like a father, but like a researcher staring at a data point. And I couldn't help but wonder, had I ever been loved, or was I always just part of a plan? Then came the hearing. Jacob, flanked by 3 attorneys, stood calm and polished. I stood alone with Andrew beside me. Not as a lawyer this time, but as a witness. The chair of the Medical Ethics Board read through the allegations. Unlicensed research, violation of parental consent laws, attempted use of unapproved medical devices on a minor. And then, they played the security footage of Jacob entering the OR without registering, of the nurse objecting, of him bypassing the surgical plan and replacing tools moments before anesthesia. I closed my eyes. I couldn't bear to watch. But when I opened them again, Jacob was staring straight at me. No remorse. Only rage. Like I had ruined something he believed was his legacy. The board's decision came swift and brutal. Permanent revocation of medical license. Referral to criminal prosecutors. He was arrested that night in the parking lot. And as the rain began to fall, cold and punishing, I held Noah's hand and walked away. Noah asked me a question 2 weeks after the trial. "Mom, can I sleep with the door open?" I froze. We were in the new house by then, a small rental on the edge of town with creaky stairs, an overgrown yard, and mismatched curtains. But it was safe, ours, quiet. Noah had always been a kid who needed security, nightlights, closed doors, 3 hugs before bed. I looked at him in his pajamas, clutching his stuffed dinosaur. "You sure?" I asked gently. He nodded. "I'm not scared anymore." "Not with you." I swallowed hard and kissed his forehead. For the first time in years, the door stayed open. The next few months were about breathing again. No reporters camped outside. No calls from Jacob's lawyers. No threats hidden behind polite emails. The silence wasn't just peaceful, it was healing. Andrew stayed in touch. Not often, just enough. He never made it complicated. Never pushed. Just check-ins, little reminders that I wasn't alone in this. He'd send Noah science books. He once mailed me a box of tea with a note that said, "Rest doesn't mean weakness. It means you survived." I found a job again, not at a hospital, not in research. Something different, something softer. I began teaching basic biology at a local community college. It felt strange at first, stepping into a classroom instead of a lab. But the students listened. They asked questions. They didn't look at me like I was someone's ex, wife, or a cautionary tale. They looked at me like a person. Sometimes I'd catch myself mid-lecture, eyes stinging, realizing I was smiling without trying. Noah started painting. He'd come home from school, set up on the kitchen table with little water cups and cheap brushes, and just make things. One day, he held up a canvas he'd been working on for a week. It was a field under a huge sky. In the middle stood 2 figures, a tall woman holding the hand of a boy. I stared at it for a long time. "Is that us?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Yeah," he said proudly, "but it's not now. It's someday." "That's us on the hill near the cabin." "What cabin?" "The one we're gonna buy when we're rich," he grinned. "With the big porch and no mean people allowed." And just like that, I found something to hope for again. Not revenge, not justice, just a hill, a porch, a boy with paint on his hands, and a door that never had to be locked. Because we weren't afraid anymore. 2 months after the trial, a letter arrived at the new house. No return address, just my name in uneven handwriting on the envelope. No postmark either. Someone had dropped it off by hand. I almost didn't open it. For a second, I thought it might be from Jacob. But when I slid my finger under the flap and unfolded the page, I knew instantly. It was Andrew's handwriting. The same blocky, careful print he used on birthday cards when we were teenagers. The kind of writing that made every word feel considered. It started like this. "I wrote this the night before I testified, but I couldn't bring myself to send it until I knew you were free. You don't owe me anything. I'm not writing for closure. I just want you to know what I saw, not as a witness in court, but as a man who never stopped seeing you." He wrote about the day he met me. That old summer picnic. How I laughed too loudly and drank too much soda and beat everyone at trivia. He wrote about watching me walk into the courtroom that day, not broken, but standing. How I held my own under cross-examination, even when Jacob's lawyers tried to twist my words. "I kept thinking," he wrote, "that if your son ever wonders what bravery looks like, He won't need a book. He'll just need to remember you. By the time I finished the letter, my hands were shaking, not because of what he said, but because of what he didn't. There was no confession of love, no desperate plea to reconnect, no awkward apology for the years we lost. Just a truth, quiet, undeniable. He had never stopped believing in me, even when I forgot how to believe in myself. I read the letter again that night after Noah went to bed. Then again the next morning. I didn't call him, didn't text. I didn't know what to say yet, what we were, what we could be. But I folded the letter carefully and placed it in the drawer beside my bed, right next to the key to a house we no longer locked. Not because it was the end of something, but because maybe it was the start. I didn't open the storage box for a year. It had followed me from apartment to apartment, from the cabin Jacob built to the guest room at Aunt May's, always taped shut, always marked in my handwriting Andrew Old stuff. The truth was, I didn't want to know what was inside, because what if it reminded me of the boy I loved, not the man who had saved me? But that morning, something shifted. Maybe it was Noah asking why we kept Daddy's dusty treasure chest in the closet, or maybe it was the letter I couldn't stop rereading. Either way, I sat on the floor, peeled back the tape, and opened the lid. Inside was a mess of years: an old Red Sox cap, a faded photo of us in high school, crumpled sheet music from the band he'd formed for exactly 3 weeks, and a folder. Thick, heavy, bound with a rubber band. I opened it, expecting school papers. But what I found was a manuscript. Untitled Project by Andrew Monroe. Page 1. There's a woman who lives on the edge of a cliff, and every morning she watches the sea to see if the waves have forgiven her. I stopped breathing. It wasn't fiction. It was me, page after page. He had written my story, not as I told it, but as he saw it, through the eyes of someone who never stopped loving the broken girl on the cliff's edge. He had written about the years after I left, how he imagined my mornings, my fears, the sound of my laugh when no one was around to hear it. It wasn't polished. Some pages had furious cross-outs, angry arrows pointing to whole sections, and "No, this isn't her voice. Try again." But it was honest, unfiltered, and in every line, I saw the man he had become, someone who didn't need to be in my life to honor it. That night, I sat on the porch with a glass of wine and the pages in my lap. Noah was asleep inside. The wind was gentle, the moon hung low, and for the first time since the trial, I felt something I hadn't dared name. Hope. Not for things to return to what they were, but for something new, something quieter, something mine. The next morning, I called the number I hadn't dialed in almost 6 months. "Hello." His voice was lower than I remembered, a little more worn. "It's me," I said. I heard him take a breath. Then, softly, I hoped it would be. He didn't ask me why I called. He didn't fill the silence with small talk or apologies. He just waited. And maybe that was what I needed most. "I read it," I said finally, "the manuscript." A pause, then, "I didn't think you'd keep it." I didn't think I would either. I could hear the rustle of wind on his end, like he was outside too. Maybe pacing, maybe sitting still for the first time in days. "I didn't write it to win you back," he said carefully. "I wrote it because I couldn't carry it anymore." I nodded even though he couldn't see me. "I know." There was another long silence. But this one wasn't heavy. It was open, like a door left ajar. Then he asked the only question that mattered. "Are you okay?" And for the first time in a very long time, I didn't have to lie. "I think I will be." In the weeks that followed, we spoke often, but never about the past. We talked about Noah's latest dinosaur obsession, about his teaching job in Vermont, about the strange comfort of making your own breakfast in silence. I told him about the shelter I'd started volunteering at, about the single moms who reminded me of versions of myself, about the girl named Peyton who had memorized every constellation in the winter sky. We didn't talk about Charles, or the cave, or the scars, physical or otherwise, not yet. Then one day he asked, Would it be okay if I sent Noah something? I hesitated. Not because I didn't trust him, but because I didn't know what it would mean to say yes. What is it? A telescope, he said. Nothing fancy. But I remember he used to love stargazing. I blinked. He still does, and just like that, the box arrived, carefully wrapped, with a note in blocky handwriting. To Noah, from someone who still believes in wonder. Noah read it, then looked up at me. Can I call him? I nodded slowly. Yes, I think you can. That night, I watched my son press the phone to his ear and talk about moons and galaxies with the man he barely remembered, and yet somehow trusted. He laughed. He asked questions. He told him about the blanket fort we'd made in the living room and how we pretended it was a spaceship. And I stood in the doorway, heart full of things I couldn't name, not love, not grief, but maybe forgiveness. By spring, the snow melted from the porch rails and the garden began to breathe again. I still hadn't answered the question I knew would come next. Would you ever let me visit? But for now, we had stories. We had stargazing. We had space. And the slow rebuilding of something that might one day be safe again. I didn't expect to see him so soon. But one morning in late April, a letter arrived. A real one, handwritten, no return address. Just my name in his uneven scrawl. Inside was a single page. If you're not ready, that's okay. But I'll be driving through your town next weekend. Just passing through. I won't knock. I won't call. But I'll park by the trailhead at Cedar Ridge. The one with the overlook. I'll be there for 1 hour. Just in case. There was no pressure, no guilt. Just a quiet offering of presence. And somehow that made all the difference. The day came. I told myself I wasn't going. I had laundry to fold, emails to answer, groceries to buy, the usual armor of excuses. But at 10:40 a.m., I was already halfway up Cedar Ridge, breath catching in my throat with every step. Not from nerves, from hope. I saw his car first, parked just off the shoulder, clean, simple, familiar. He wasn't leaning against it or pacing or even looking around. He was sitting on the hood, thermos in hand, gazing at the horizon like it had a secret to tell. And when he saw me, really saw me, he didn't stand right away. He just smiled. Not the smile from 10 years ago. Not the one from the wedding photos or the hospital room. But something quieter, older, something that didn't ask for anything. I wasn't sure you'd come, he said. I wasn't either, I replied. I sat beside him, close, but not touching. The space between us felt like its own kind of language. We watched the wind play with the leaves below. How's Noah? He asked. Better? I said truthfully. He asks about you. I hope that's a good thing. It is. We didn't talk about the cave, or the escape, or the pain. Not that day. That day was for breathing again. We watched two hawks circle overhead. We drank coffee from his thermos. We laughed, gently, about how we both looked a little more tired and a little more human than before. And then he said it. I'm sorry for what I became. Not just in the cave. Long before that. I looked at him, this man who once nearly cost me everything, and I said what I didn't think I could. I'm not here for an apology. He blinked. Then why are you here? Because for the first time in my life, I don't need anything from you. And that means maybe, just maybe, I can choose to see you clearly. We didn't hug when we parted. We didn't make promises. We just nodded. Two people no longer trying to rewrite the past, just trying to write something better moving forward. Spring bled into summer without permission. The trees outside the cabin grew thick and green, and the world felt softer somehow. Not because it hurt less, but because I was no longer afraid of the hurt. I had survived it. No, I had rewritten it. I stopped checking my phone for their names. I stopped expecting them to suddenly understand what I had been trying to say all those years through silence and sacrifice. Because understanding isn't owed, and some people only know how to take. I wasn't angry anymore. Just done. Every week I walked the local trails, sometimes with Bresson, my mentee, who had started calling me Coach A, with a grin that dared me to object. Other times alone, letting the quiet fill the places that had once been crowded with guilt. I finally had space to think, real uninterrupted thought. What did I want? What had I ever wanted? Not praise, not trophies, just peace, freedom. To build something, anything, that wasn't dependent on someone else's desperation. One morning in June, I woke up before dawn. Not from nightmares, not from stress, just awake. I made coffee and sat outside with a journal I'd barely touched in years. And I started writing. Not lists this time, not budgets, not apologies, but ideas. Things I wanted to try, places I wanted to go, skills I wanted to learn, a life I wanted to build, not in response to anyone's need, but from my own want. It was terrifying and thrilling. That week, I enrolled in part-time woodworking class at a nearby community center. Just something small, one evening a week. No pressure. By the third class, I had built a small shelf. It wobbled a little. The stain was uneven. But it was mine. It sat by the fireplace, holding books I loved and one chipped mug I no longer hated. Because now it meant something different. It meant survival. It meant transformation. Sometimes the past still knocked. Clara sent a card on my birthday. No money asked. No hidden message, just a handwritten. I'm thinking of you. Luke sent a photo of his new apartment. Paid the deposit myself. He wrote, and that was all. Even Mom eventually sent a package. Inside was a scarf she'd knitted herself. Not perfect. A little frayed at the edges. But warm. With it a note, I don't expect anything. Just wanted you to know I'm still here learning. I didn't respond right away. But I kept the scarf. By autumn, the leaves had started turning. The cabin windows framed bursts of orange and red, like paintings I hadn't asked for, but now couldn't stop staring at. And just like that, 1 year had almost passed since I walked away from the people I used to call home. It didn't happen overnight, but I had built something better. Bryson, my mentee, had become more than just a project. He'd become a reminder that showing up mattered. That pouring into someone wasn't the same as being emptied by everyone. He told me one afternoon after our session, I used to think people who left their families were selfish, but you're the most selfless person I know. That stayed with me. Around Thanksgiving, Clara wrote again. This time, she didn't talk about family. She wrote about therapy, about how she'd started unpacking her own guilt, about how she used to think being the loudest meant she was the most present. Now she realized it often meant she wasn't listening at all. She didn't ask me to come home. She just told me she understood why I left. By December, the air was thin and clean again. Snow returned quietly like it had the year before. But this time, it didn't feel like a weight. It felt like a clean page. I set up a small tree by the fireplace, decorated it with carved wooden ornaments I made myself in class. I mailed gifts to a few friends I'd made in town. I made hot cocoa from scratch. I played music I actually liked. I read. And on Christmas morning, I didn't wait for a knock. There was none, and that was okay. Around noon, I opened a small box I had left under the tree. Inside was a folded sheet of paper. It wasn't from anyone else. I had written it a month ago and sealed it with wax just for me. It read, Dear Aiden, this year, you kept a promise you didn't know you'd made. You chose peace. You chose truth. You chose yourself. And for that, I'm proud of you, love. Me. I sat by the fire, that letter in my hand, and for the first time in my life, I believed every word. I never told my family to disappear. But I told them I wouldn't disappear for them anymore. And slowly, they began to understand. Some, like Leah, stayed in gentle contact. Others drifted away. But I no longer begged anyone to see me, because I finally saw myself, not the giver, not the fixer, not the invisible one, just Aiden. A man who finally realized he was worthy of a quiet, beautiful life, and didn't need anyone's permission to live it. Lessons from Aiden's story. Family isn't always love. Sometimes the ones who share your blood hurt you the most, and setting boundaries isn't cruel. It's survival. Choosing peace is not selfish. You are allowed to walk away from people who constantly take but never give. Your well-being matters. you don't need permission to live in your truth. Aiden found strength not in their approval, but in finally loving himself, on his terms. Forgiveness doesn't mean returning. Aiden chose to forgive, but never to return to the place that broke him. And that was the bravest choice of all. Sometimes leaving is the most loving thing you can do. Loving yourself enough to walk away is how you begin again. Have you ever walked away from a family who only saw you as useful, not lovable? How did it feel when you finally said, enough? Share your story in the comments. We read every one of them. Subscribe to Telling Story with Me, where every story is a step toward healing.